In Yunnan province, a place known as the Land of Secret Remedies, a majestic plateau bordering several countries, the world is a blend of mystical, natural beauty and deep-seated spiritual belief. Here, people trust in the power of herbs and ancient prescriptions more than modern medicine. In the year 2024, in a remote, mountainous county of this province, a shocking incident occurred, exposing the darkest secret hidden behind an aphrodisiac miracle cure sought after by the elite. It all began when a retired doctor accidentally discovered medical metal objects in a piece of horse bone paste. From those tiny screws, one of the most heinous cases was unraveled, exposing the crimes of a syndicate that had turned the bodies of more than 50 people into raw material for a rendering pot. Men of the upper class, especially those past their prime, harbor a silent obsession, a yearning to reclaim the vigor of their youth. Whispers circulate about countless secret remedies, from root-infused wines to exotic dishes, all with the sole purpose of reinforcing their masculinity. And in the deep mountains of Yunnan, one miracle cure was praised above all others, a substance believed to make men energetic and help gentlemen regain their form. That substance was horsebone paste. To find the purest kind, one had to travel to a remote mountain county. It was rumored that the horses there grazed on high mountain slopes, drank from spring sources, and ate plants that absorbed the essence of heaven and earth, making their bones a vessel of extraordinary energy. In this county, asking about horsebone paste would lead anyone to a single address, the mighty Tiger Li's paste shop. The place had become a legendary destination, a guarantee of quality. The owner, Li Hu, was a man in his 40s, stout, with a dark complexion weathered by the elements, always wearing the open, honest demeanor of a mountain dweller. He was considered a master in the art of paste making, the keeper of the secret to turning horse skeletons into a life-giving elixir for men. Li's shop was no luxury restaurant. It was just a spacious, single-story house with a few simple wooden tables and chairs out front for guests to rest and enjoy rustic dishes. But the back was what made Li's reputation, a large kitchen area with enormous cast-iron pots constantly billowing with smoke. People came to Li's shop not just to buy the paste, but to witness his elaborate cooking process firsthand. Li never hid anything. He would proudly lead guests to the kitchen, pointing at the fresh skeletons of white and golden horses being stripped of their meat by his workers before being placed in the pots. He would talk endlessly about selecting the healthiest horses, about simmering them continuously for 7 days and 7 nights over ironwood so the fire never died, about ensuring the water never ran dry, and about filtering the mixture repeatedly to get a batch of paste that was crystal clear, thick, and had a distinctive aroma. He would often beat his chest and tell customers that his horse paste was the real deal, pure and potent. It wasn't just good for the elderly, with their aching backs and tired knees. It was especially good for men. Just a small spoonful a day, mixed with wine or honey, and you'd feel your strength surge, earning the respect of your wife and family. And people believed him. They believed his rustic appearance, his simple advertisements, and most importantly, they believed in the quality of the product. The amber-colored fragrant paste, when tried, truly worked. Middle-aged men felt their bodies become stronger, their vitality more abundant. Word spread, and the mighty Tiger Li's paste shop became increasingly crowded. Money poured into Li's pockets. He built a new house, bought a car, and became one of the wealthiest men in the county. But every party must come to an end. About 2 years ago, Li's supply of horses began to dwindle. The good, healthy horses in the region had nearly all been bought up by him. The cost of acquiring a quality horse skeleton skyrocketed. Li started to worry. Without horses, his empire would collapse. Necessity being the mother of invention, he began to think of a substitute: cow bones. Cow bones are still bones, he told himself. They have calcium, they're nutritious. So, Li began secretly buying cow bones from slaughterhouses in the lowlands, bringing them back to mix with the few remaining horse bones to make his paste. The new batch, in terms of color, didn't look much different. But his regular customers, those who had used his paste for years, began to notice a change. The paste no longer had its rich, deep aroma. Instead, it had an indescribable, slightly off-putting taste. Worse, when they used it, They no longer felt the distinct effects of the past. Complaints began to surface. At first, they were just whispers. But soon, people started telling Lee to his face that his paste tasted strange lately, not like before, and it didn't seem to make them feel any stronger. Lee, with the cunning of a seasoned swindler, would just laugh it off and find excuses. He blamed the weather, the water source, or said that this batch was cooked with a different type of firewood. But lies couldn't hide the truth. The number of customers began to drop. Lee's revenue plummeted. To make matters worse, while cow bones were cheaper than horse bones, they weren't cheap. After deducting all costs, Lee's profit was negligible. From a wealthy owner, Lee once again faced financial worries and the risk of losing the brand he had worked so hard to build. Desperation and deadlock began to gnaw at his mind. And tragedy, as it often does, began with a drinking session, with words spoken in a drunken stupor. One weekend evening, after a slow day of business, Lee felt dejected. He closed the shop early and drove alone to the county town, finding a familiar drinking spot. He ordered a plate of pig intestines, a bottle of corn wine, and sat drinking by himself. Just then, a well-dressed man in shiny leather shoes walked in. Seeing Lee, the man smiled and approached. He called out Lee Hu's name, saying it had been a long time and that he still looked as sharp as ever. Lee looked up, taking a moment to recognize the man. It was Sun Youngfa, an old classmate. Back in the day, Sun wasn't a good student and his family wasn't well off, but he was clever and had a silver tongue. After graduation, they went their separate ways, and Lee had lost touch with him. He'd heard Sun had gone to the city to do business. He never expected to see him here. Lee joyfully stood up and invited his friend to sit down for a few drinks. He asked what Sun was doing these days to look so dapper. Sun chuckled and sat down. He boasted that he had just won a contract and become the director of the Tianqiuyuan Funeral Home, the only private crematorium in the entire county, which had been built and was operational for a few years. The two men, two different fates, sat drinking together. As the wine flowed, so did the words. They began to complain about their professional struggles. Lee lamented his declining horse-paste business, the lack of raw materials, and his ineffective use of cow bones as a substitute. Hearing Lee's complaints, Sun just smiled faintly, a somewhat mysterious smile. He too began to talk about his difficulties, but of a completely different nature. Sun said, his voice slurring from the alcohol, "You think being the director of a crematorium is all glory? It's a headache, no joke. The facility is new, operating costs are high, and the worst part is dealing with the unclaimed bodies, or those from families too poor to afford a proper funeral. By regulation, we still have to cremate them, but we have to pay for the fuel and electricity out of our own pocket. For every case like that, I lose a couple $100. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned close to Lee's ear, his voice a devilish whisper. "Let me tell you a secret. When I first opened, I was in a tight spot too. I knew a guy who ran a pho restaurant down the provincial city. He was complaining just like you are now, about how expensive cow bones were. I secretly sold him a few unclaimed bodies. You know what? After that, his restaurant was packed. People praised his broth for being unusually rich and sweet. It's the sweetness from human bones, you see. How can cow or pig bones compare?" Lee's face turned pale. His hand holding the wine cup trembled violently. He stammered, "Are you crazy? What are you saying?" "That's sacrilegious," Sun sneered, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Sacrilegious, but profitable. I'm just talking about an economic solution. You need cheap, high-quality bones. I need to get rid of unprofitable inventory. Why don't we cooperate?" he proposed. "Instead of me losing money to burn them, I'll bring them to you. You'll have an almost free source of raw material, and the quality is beyond question. You just need to pay me a small processing fee, which is still many times cheaper than horse bones. 2 birds, 1 stone. We both win." Lee slammed the table and stood up, nearly knocking over the wine bottle. "Shut your mouth," he yelled. "That's an act of utter depravity. Are you even human?" Knowing he couldn't convince him right away, Sun just smiled faintly, stood up, and patted Lee on the shoulder. "I'm just offering a suggestion," he said. "Think about it. When your shop is on the verge of closing down, give me a call. With that, Sun pulled out a business card, placed it on the table in front of Lee, and calmly left, leaving Lee alone, his mind in a turmoil. Initially, Lee had dismissed Sun's sick proposal. He was disgusted, horrified, but as the drunkenness wore off, as he returned to the harsh reality of his empty restaurant and the pile of unpaid bills, the words of his demonic classmate began to echo in his ears. Deadlock and desperation slowly eroded his last moral boundaries. A week passed in torment. Lee's business got worse. He had to let 2 of his workers go. He watched his empire crumble, looked at his bleak future, and then he looked at Director Sun's business card. Late one night, after tossing and turning, unable to sleep, Lee picked up his phone. His hand trembled as he dialed a familiar number. On the other end, Sun's voice sounded not at all surprised. "I knew you'd call," he said. Lee took a deep breath, his voice hoarse, words struggling to escape his throat. "Are you serious? Just this once?" On the other end, Sun let out a cold laugh. "Don't worry, my friend. Once you try it, you won't want to stop." The Devil's Pact was sealed. Lee didn't know that phone call would not only push him down the path of crime, but also open a horrific tragedy for the entire region. That night, the entire county of Talmilang was shrouded in a thick silence, broken only by the chirping of insects and the wind whistling through the mountain passes. Around 2 in the morning, a covered pickup truck with its headlights off rolled quietly down the dirt road leading to the back of the mighty Tiger Lee's paste shop. The truck stopped, and Director Sun got out of the driver's seat, along with one of his workers. Without a word, they quickly opened the truck bed and struggled to carry a black body bag inside. Lee stood at the kitchen door, shaking like a leaf, his teeth chattering. He didn't dare look directly at the black bag, only feeling the deadly cold emanating from it. Sun placed the bag on the cement kitchen floor and patted Lee on the shoulder, a seemingly friendly gesture that made Lee jump. Sun said nothing, just nodded before he and his worker quickly left, disappearing into the darkness like ghosts, leaving Lee alone with the crime about to take shape. The large kitchen now felt strangely cold, even though the fire in the furnace still smoldered. Lee stood there, staring at the object on the floor. He was terrified, disgusted, wanting to drag it outside and throw it off a cliff. But then, images of debt notices, of the house about to be mortgaged, of the prospect of bankruptcy and the ridicule of others flooded his mind. He gritted his teeth, sweat soaking his shirt. Finally, he closed his eyes and took the plunge. That night, Lee Hu, a once considered gentle shop owner, did something he could never have imagined in his entire life. He put a human body into his pacemaking pot. It was the longest night of his life, a night in hell on earth. He had to perform all the steps himself, the steps he used to proudly show his customers, but which now became utterly repulsive. He had to use knives and axes to process the special ingredient. The metallic smell of blood mixed with the strong aroma of herbs, creating a nauseating, haunting scent that shot up his throat, forcing him to run outside to vomit violently several times. But after each time, he had to go back in and continue his work. He tried to reassure himself that it was just a skeleton, just like horse or cow bones. He tried not to look at the anonymous victim's face, tried to see it as just a piece of meat, a commodity. 7 days later, the first batch of paste made with the special ingredient was ready. Lee scooped a little into a bowl, his trembling hand bringing it to his mouth to taste. A rich, savory sweetness melted in his mouth, a flavor that even his finest batches of horse paste could never match. A chilling and morbidly exhilarating sensation ran down his spine. He knew he had succeeded. Sun hadn't lied. When the new batch was put on sale, the first few remaining customers immediately noticed the difference. A familiar old man, after tasting a small piece, exclaimed, "Oh, Mr. Lee, this batch is so delicious. Fragrant, sweet, just like the old days, maybe even better." I felt a jolt as soon as I drank it. Lee just smiled, a smile so forced it was a grimace, and repeated his old story about finding a new source of precious horses from a distant mountain. The good news spread like wildfire. People flocked to Lee's shop again, as if it were a festival. They bought a kilogram, found it effective, and came back to buy 5, then 10. Men whispered to each other about the miraculous effects of the new paste, how it helped them find themselves again in their love lives. They bought it for themselves, as gifts for their superiors, for their friends. Lee's revenue skyrocketed. Within a month, he had paid off all his debts, and money began to flow into his pockets like water. He had crossed the first line. And when a crime is committed successfully and brings enormous benefits, it is easily repeated. Lee, from a victim of circumstance, had become a demon in human form, an active accomplice in Director Sun's horrific scheme. The second, third phone calls happened quickly. Lee no longer hesitated, no longer tormented himself. He just asked curtly, "Got any new stock?" And the night trucks came silently again. The initial disgust was replaced by the calloused indifference of habit and the allure of money. Lee's business had entered a new chapter, one written in crime. He became bolder. Every week, he regularly received 3 sets from Director Sun's crematorium. The price for each was 10 million dong, about $400, paid in cash upon delivery. According to Lee's calculations, an average adult body could produce about 10 kilograms of finished paste. With a selling price of 5 million dong, about $200 per kilogram, after subtracting the $400 cost of raw materials and other expenses, each body brought him a net profit of nearly 40 million dong, almost $1,600. It was a colossal sum that he had never dared to dream of, even in his golden days. Lee was no longer a small shop owner. He had turned his eatery into a crucial link in a criminal machine. He became rich quickly, but also more withdrawn and suspicious. He was no longer jovial or boastful with customers. He fired his 2 old workers, doing almost everything in the kitchen himself, allowing no one to enter his domain. He lived a reclusive, sullen life, often waking up startled in the night from nightmares, dreaming of strange faces staring at him from within the boiling cauldron of paste. But then, upon waking, looking at the neatly stacked piles of cash in his safe, he would reassure himself. The crime would probably never be exposed, if not for a coincidence, a small detail that the demons could never have foreseen. The story began to unravel on an afternoon in July 2024. Dr. Zhao Guoan, a retired surgeon living in the provincial city, was a very loyal customer of the mighty Tiger Lee's paste shop. Many years ago, his mother suffered from severe degenerative arthritis, making it very difficult for her to walk. Hearing a recommendation, he didn't mind the long journey of over 100 kilometers, traveling all the way to Taomalang County to buy Lee's paste for his mother. And miraculously, after using it for a while, his mother's condition improved significantly. From then on, Dr. Zhao had absolute faith in Lee's product. Every few months, he would drive up to buy a few kilograms of paste for his mother. About a year ago, he also noticed a decline in quality, but sympathized, thinking it was due to the increasing scarcity of horses. Until recently, hearing that Lee's shop had regained its premium paste, even better than before, Dr. Zhao was overjoyed. He immediately arranged a trip to the county. When he arrived, he found the shop unusually crowded. Lee greeted him, but seemed less enthusiastic than before, his eyes somewhat evasive. Dr. Zhao didn't pay much attention. He was only interested in the quality of the paste. After buying 5 kilograms of the latest batch for 25 million dong, about $1,000, he left happily, full of hope for its effect on his elderly mother. That evening, at home, Dr. Zhao carefully took out a piece of the new paste to prepare for his mother. The paste had a beautiful amber color and a very fragrant, rich smell. He used a small, sharp knife to cut a thin slice to steam with honey. As the blade cut through the paste, he heard a faint clink and felt something hard inside that stopped the knife. Surprised, he used the tip of the knife to gently pry it out. A small, shiny metal object fell out of the paste. He picked it up to examine it. It was a metal clamp of a very strange shape. Doctor Zhao frowned, feeling something was wrong. He continued to slice the paste into thinner pieces, and then his surprise turned into genuine confusion when he found several more foreign objects. This time, it was 3 stainless steel screws, very small, with extremely fine threads. Dr. Zhao placed all the objects on a white piece of paper and sat down, staring at them. A cold chill ran down his spine. With over 30 years of experience as an orthopedic surgeon specializing in trauma and bone fractures, Dr. Zhao recognized them immediately. These were not ordinary clamps or screws. These were specialized medical devices, the types of clamps and screws used to fix bones in human femur fracture surgeries. A crazy hypothesis is a thought so horrific it was unbelievable, flashed through his mind. It can't be. It must be a mistake. Maybe something metal accidentally fell into the pot during cooking. He tried to calm himself, but then he remembered another detail. This batch of paste, though very fragrant, had a slightly strange taste, a faint, gamey smell he couldn't name. He stood up, went to the box of paste, and held a piece to his nose, sniffing it carefully. That smell, now, under the light of suspicion, suddenly became terrifying. No, he couldn't let this go. No matter how wild the hypothesis, he had to find the truth. It wasn't just about his mother's health, or his own, but that of hundreds, thousands of others. The next day, Dr. Zhao carefully wrapped a small piece of the paste in a sealed plastic bag and told his family he had business in the capital. He didn't take his own car, but caught a bus. He went to the Institute of Forensic Science, where an old friend of his worked. He didn't specify the origin of the sample, only asking his friend to perform a test he didn't dare say out loud, a DNA analysis. The days waiting for the results were the longest and heaviest of the old doctor's life. He still cared for his mother, still acted normal, but his heart was on fire. He both hoped he was wrong, that it was just a silly mistake, and feared facing a truth too cruel to bear. A week later, his friend from the capital called. His voice on the other end was extremely serious. He asked where Dr. Zhao was, that they needed to meet immediately, and not to talk about this with anyone. The meeting took place at a small, quiet coffee shop in the provincial city center of Dr. Zhao's friend, a high-ranking official from the Institute of Forensic Science, came alone. He brought no documents, but his face was etched with attention and horror he didn't hide. He asked where the sample Dr. Zhao had sent came from. Dr. Zhao took a deep breath to stay calm and recounted the entire story, from discovering the metal clamps and screws in the horse paste to his suspicions about their origin. After listening, his friend was silent for a long time, his eyebrows knitted together. Then he said one sentence, a calm sentence whose weight felt like a boulder crushing the old doctor's mind. He said the DNA test results showed that the paste sample contained human DNA, specifically the DNA of multiple different people. It wasn't horse paste, it was human paste. Even though he had prepared for the worst, hearing those exact words, Dr. Zhao felt the world spin. Nausea rose in his throat. The rich, sweet taste of the paste that his mother and he himself had eaten for so many years suddenly became sickeningly cloying. Hundreds, thousands of people had believed in this miracle cure, had spent large sums of money to buy it for their health, only to receive something cooked from the bodies of their own kind. The truth was beyond imagination, beyond barbaric. His friend continued, his voice grave. This is no longer a simple case of fraud. This is an exceptionally serious criminal case. You must report it to the police immediately, and you must act quickly, before the perpetrators have time to destroy the evidence. I will send the official analysis report to the provincial police later, but you must go now. Dr. Zhao understood. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from outrage. After leaving the coffee shop, he didn't go home. He went straight to the provincial police headquarters. At the duty desk, though his voice still trembled with emotion, he presented the entire incident as clearly and logically as he could. Initially, the officers on duty were skeptical of such a wild story. But when Dr. Zhao, a reputable doctor in the province, presented the physical evidence of the medical clamps and screws, and especially when he said that the forensic analysis had confirmed the presence of human DNA, they knew this was a real and extremely serious matter. The case was immediately reported to the provincial police directorate. An emergency task force was established that very afternoon, personally led by Chen Weidong, the chief of the Criminal Investigation Division. Chief Chen was a famously tough and experienced investigator who had solved many complex cases. As soon as he received the information, he He knew they were dealing with an incredibly cruel and cunning type of criminal, a crime that trampled on all moral foundations of society. In an urgent meeting with the task force, Chief Chen said they had to act fast and secretly. The suspect had been in business for a long time and was certainly on high alert. Any slip-up would allow him to dispose of or destroy evidence. They couldn't just go and ask questions. They needed to catch him in the act with irrefutable proof. A team of 5 undercover officers, led by a deputy chief, was sent to Taomulang County that night. They disguised themselves as backpackers and agricultural traders to secretly monitor all movements at the Mighty Tiger Li's paste shop and its owner, Li Hu. Simultaneously, a large force of criminal police, in coordination with SWAT units, was ordered to be on standby in the county town, ready to move on command. After 2 days of surveillance, the officers reported back with crucial information. Li's shop operated with suspicious secrecy. He rarely went out, and the rear kitchen area was heavily guarded, inaccessible to strangers. All waste from the kitchen was personally taken by Li to be burned in a deep pit in his garden, never thrown out. Most notably, the officers discovered a large industrial freezer, the type used for storing food, kept in a separate locked shed, always secured with a large, sturdy padlock. Li appeared paranoid, constantly looking around and wary of strangers loitering near his shop. All these details reinforced the task force's assessment. Li was definitely hiding a terrible secret. On the morning of the 3rd day, at dawn on the 14th of August, 2024, as fog still clung to the mountainsides, Chief Chen decided to act. He couldn't wait any longer. An officer reported a tip from a local source that there would be a delivery that night around 1 or 2 in the morning. This was the golden opportunity. Chief Chen gave the order over the radio, telling all units to get into position. The objective was to capture the suspect and all evidence, ensuring absolute safety and the element of surprise, acting only on his command. The police convoy, in complete silence, without sirens, quietly left the county town and headed towards Taomulang. They stopped about 2 kilometers from Li's shop, and the officers split into multiple teams, moving on foot through trails and fields to form a tightening cordon around the target. Time crawled by in the tense atmosphere. The entire area was plunged into a chilling darkness and silence. At exactly 1:30 a.m. from the single road leading into the village, a covered pickup truck appeared. It moved slowly, its headlights off, using only dim fog lights. It drove straight to the back of Li's shop and stopped. The scout's voice came through Chief Chen's earpiece. Target has appeared. 2 subjects getting out of the vehicle, preparing to transfer the goods. Chief Chen ordered all teams to be ready, to wait for them to go inside, and for Team 1 to be prepared to block the truck's escape route. The back door of the shop opened. Li appeared, looked around, and gave a signal. The 2 men from the pickup truck, a director's son and a worker, carried a long black bag into the kitchen. The moment the kitchen door closed, the time was ripe. As soon as Chief Chen's order was given, from all directions, dark figures burst from their hiding places. Fully armed SWAT officers stormed in from both the front and back doors. Another team shot forward like an arrow to block the pickup truck. The kitchen door was kicked open. Inside, Li and Director Sun were in the middle of their transaction. Seeing the police suddenly appear, the color drained from both their faces. Director Sun tried to run, but was tackled to the floor by officers. Li stood frozen, shaking uncontrollably. Chief Chen didn't waste words. He and a team went straight to the shed. With a pair of bolt cutters, the freezer's padlock was snapped. The freezer door was opened. Before everyone's eyes, a horrific scene was revealed. Inside the freezer were not horse or beef carcasses. Instead, there were 2 human bodies, wrapped in black plastic, frozen solid. At the same time, another team rushed into the kitchen. They lifted the lids of the giant cast iron pots still simmering on the stove. Amidst the hot steam, mixed in with bags of herbs, were parts of human bodies in the process of decomposition, cooked to a pulp. A thick, putrid stench arose, making even the most seasoned police officers turn away. Faced with the irrefutable evidence found at the scene, Li Hu completely broke down. He was not a professional criminal with nerves of steel. Faced with a sudden collapse after years of living in crime, his psychological defenses quickly crumbled. In the interrogation room at the provincial police headquarters, Li was questioned. He no longer tried to deny his guilt. He bowed his head, his body still trembling, and recounted the entire tragic story of his life, a story born from desperation and a devil's proposal. He named the person who supplied him with the raw materials, the mastermind behind the entire crime, director Sun Yongfa. He detailed the nighttime deliveries, the price of $400 per set, and how he had single-handedly turned those bodies into the paste that people had praised as a miracle cure. With Li's initial confession, the investigators turned their attention to Director Sunday. Unlike Li, the director of the Tianqiuyuan funeral home initially maintained an extremely calm and cooperative demeanor. He was educated, articulate, and knew the law. He insisted he was the victim of slander, that the loss of a few unclaimed bodies was due to procedural errors by his subordinates. But when Chief Chen placed the irrefutable evidence from the scene on the table, from the black bag containing the body caught red-handed to Li's detailed confession, the intellectual's mask was finally stripped away. Faced with the evidence, Director Sun knew any denial was futile. He didn't scream or panic like Li. He just sat there, silent for a long time, then looked up, staring directly at the investigators, and he began to confess. His confession was not one of remorse, but a cold recounting of a failed business model. He talked about pouring all his savings and borrowing heavily to invest in the modern crematorium, but the profits were not as expected. In particular, the cost of cremating unclaimed bodies had become a financial burden. And then, after hearing his old classmate complain about business costs, a sick business idea was born. He saw those bodies not as people, but as a type of inventory that needed to be disposed of in the most profitable way. He admitted to selling a total of over 50 bodies to Li Hu over 2 years. An investigator asked about the ashes. They returned to the victims' families. Director Sun smirked, a smile that sent shivers down one's spine. Ashes, animal bones, charcoal, grind them up, and you've got ashes. People are grieving. Who has the time or mind to check what kind of ashes they are? Director Sun's confession officially closed the criminal investigation, but it opened up a much more difficult and painful task for the task force. Informing dozens of families of the horrific truth that the urn of ashes they had been reverently worshiping on their ancestral altars was just the dust of animal bones, while the bodies of their loved ones had been turned into ingredients for a pot of paste. The case of the Tianqiuyuan funeral home and Li's horse paste shop sent a seismic shock across the nation. The scale and nature of the crime surpassed all imagination, making it one of the most barbaric and inhumane cases ever. Public opinion boiled with rage, demanding the strictest sentence for the demons in human form. A few months later, the Yunnan Provincial People's Court opened the first trial for the two defendants, Sun Yongfa and Li Hu. The trial attracted immense attention from dozens of media outlets and hundreds of citizens. Security around the courthouse was tightened to the maximum. Outside, relatives of the victims stood, holding portraits of the deceased, their eyes filled with tears. They weren't there to cause trouble. They were there to wait for justice. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with indignation and sorrow. The two defendants stood in the dock. Director Sun, the mastermind of the entire crime, maintained a cold, emotionless expression. Beside him, Li Hu trembled, his face ashen, not daring to look up at the people around him. The prosecution's indictment was read, lasting nearly an hour. Every detail, every criminal act of the defendants was reconstructed clearly and forcefully. The courtroom was plunged into a breathless silence. Many in the victims' family section couldn't hold back their sobs as they heard again how their loved ones' bodies had been so brutally desecrated. The questioning followed. Li Hu confessed to all his crimes, crying and begging for forgiveness. He blamed his circumstances, the desperation of his business that made him turn a blind eye. But his belated remorse could not soothe the pain of the victims' families. Director Sun, on the other hand, answered the questions matter-of-factly. He admitted to the acts, but not to the guilt. He argued that he was merely conducting a business transaction, a solution to handle inventory. His arrogant, callous, and utterly inhumane attitude enraged the entire courtroom. The closing arguments were incredibly tense, but perhaps The most moving and haunting moment was when representatives of the victims' families were allowed to speak. A young wife, who had lost her husband in a traffic accident, stood up, her hand trembling as she held his portrait. "My husband was a good man," she said through tears. "His death was already a great pain for my children and me. For the past year, I have worshipped the urn of ashes that this monster gave me. I lit incense for it every day. I told it about our struggles. I prayed for its blessing. But it wasn't my husband. It was the ashes of cow bones, of pig bones. And my husband, his body, was taken by them and cooked into paste." She asked, "This pain, this humiliation, how are we supposed to live with this?" Her words brought the entire courtroom to tears. After deliberation, the Judicial Council delivered its final verdict. The presiding judge, in a stern and indignant voice, declared that the defendant's actions were utterly barbaric and cruel, trampling on the most basic moral and human values of society. The defendants not only desecrated the bodies of the deceased, but also caused an irreparable pain and humiliation to dozens of victims' families. Such acts had to be punished with the most severe sentence. The court sentenced the defendant, San Yongfa, as the mastermind and instigator, who abused his position and the sacred trust of the people to carry out a series of organized criminal acts demonstrating ultimate moral depravity, to life imprisonment for the crimes of desecrating corpses, graves, and remains, and for fraud. The defendant Li Hu, as an active accomplice who directly desecrated more than 50 bodies for profit, was sentenced to life imprisonment for the crime of desecrating corpses, graves, and remains. The verdict was announced to applause and the sobbing cries of the victims' families. Justice had finally been served. The case was closed. The mighty Tiger Li's paste shop and the Tian Shouyuan funeral home were sealed and then demolished, becoming haunted places in the minds of the local people. Dozens of victims' families, after enduring the shock, had to begin another painful journey, waiting for DNA test results to find the correct remains of their loved ones, to hold new funerals, to once again bid farewell to their family members in an unquenchable grief. They had already experienced the pain of losing a loved one once. Now, they had to experience it again, a second time, 100 times more painful and humiliating. This case shows us how terrifyingly thin the line between human and monster can be. From business desperation, greed and inhumanity turned ordinary people into perpetrators of an unforgivable crime, a crime against both the living and the dead. It shows how depraved people can become when morality is completely overshadowed by money. The case will forever remain a scar, a horrific lesson about the degradation of humanity, and a reminder that respect for the dead is one of the last foundations of our humanity